We need to work this out.
And the title of my message today is Dishagreements. Dishagreements. There's an H squeezed in there, just so you know. How many of you who are in a relationship have ever had a fight about the proper way to do or put away dishes? Anyone in here has ever had that fight? Okay, several of you, and then a bunch of liars that don't want to admit it. God knows. He sees your heart right now. He saw what you did, okay? So, like, there's no trying. You don't need. And some of you didn't want to raise your hand because you're like, I don't. It really wasn't a disagreement. I had a proper way of viewing the situation, and they did not. And it's just taking them a while to wake up to that reality, right? My wife and I. This is a huge deal for us. I'm almost ashamed to admit how much I thought, we had so many fights about dishes in the first year of marriage. I was like, I think this is how it ends. We're about to get a divorce. You know what I mean? It's going to be over between the two of us, right? And the way it started was really subtle in that, my wife and I had really different schedules. She was still finishing up school and working a part-time job, and I had a part-time job and a full-time job. We had just gotten married, and we were living in this little apartment, and so our schedules were kind of off, and so we weren't always home at the exact same times. We had kind of this window of overlap for dinner and a little bit of hangout time before she went to bed and I went to my other job, and so whoever was there when the dishes were in the sink would often just do them, which was great. The issue I started noticing is that when I would, get up in the morning, or when I would come home and see that she'd done the dishes and she would be gone, I would notice that she was stacking these mugs, and we have a bunch of mugs because I love tea and my wife loves coffee. And she was stacking the mugs in the cupboard on top of one another. And so you have a mug, and then like a square mug with the handle, and things with handles, they don't seem to stack very well, in my opinion, okay? And so she's stacking the mugs directly on top of one another, and every time I opened it, I would have heart palpitations, because I'm just like, I feel like these are gonna fall. It's something, and it's all gonna break, and people gave us these dishes, and then we're not gonna have, all this kind of stuff. And so when I saw that she had done that incorrectly, what I would do is, when she wasn't there, I would open the cupboard and I would stagger the mugs, right? So you got two mugs, and then I would overlap a mug, overlapping two other mugs, which to me, it's a pyramid system, okay? It's much more reliable in the event of an earthquake that might happen in Iowa, which is where we were living at the time. This seems safer, this seemed better to me, and so I would just do it. I didn't confront her about it. I didn't yell at her about it. I wasn't mean about it. I would just, when I saw that it was done wrong, I would come in and be loving and do it right. You know what I mean? I would do it right on behalf of us, on behalf of God, really. And so that's what was happening, right? And then what would happen is there would be these occasions where I'd go to bed and I would have arranged things appropriately, and then I'd wake up and she would have gotten up in the morning, and she woke up before me, and she went to get her coffee, and she would notice so this has been moved around a little bit, and so she would put it back the way she wanted it, and then she would go to school, and then I would wake up after that and go to make my tea, and I would notice that things had been, something happened, like the fairies of mug rearrangement came in the night, and it's not less a fairy and more a demon, because it was wrong. It was done incorrectly. And so I would put it back, and then I would go off to work, and then she would come home from school when I wasn't there, and then she would put it back on and on, just back and forth this would go. And at first it was like, oh come on, that's so cute, and you'd rearrange it. And then the next time you'd be like, okay, less cute, but I'll rearrange it. And the next time it's like, are you serious with this woman? What does she do? This is ridiculous, right? One day she wrote a note to me when she put it, and she wrote, someone keeps moving the mugs around I was like, someone? I'm the only one who lives here with you. So why don't you just say, you're either accusing me of moving the mugs or having an affair while you're at school with someone who's moving the mugs. Either way, it's a horrible thing, right? And so then she wrote, Dear Adam, and she put like a heart around it. And so I just scratched out Adam and wrote Gretchen, so that when she came back and saw it rearranged, she would see, Dear Gretchen, someone keeps moving the mugs around. One day, we are at home and we are cleaning together and we're putting away the dishes together, and there starts to get this tension because the dishes have mounted for a while, which is why we're like, let's do it together. It'll be a Saturday thing, and I'm sure no fights will come of this. And then we have to go and put away the mugs. And so I start kind of arranging them, and she's just like, oh, it's actually, I'm like, okay, here's the thing, sweetness, is that the reality is, that's not the best way because they could fall. And she's like, they've never fallen. I'm like, well, just because it hasn't happened doesn't mean it's not likely to happen. It could very well happen. She's like, well, it doesn't seem like it is. And I grabbed the cupboard and I'm like shaking. I'm like, you see, it could happen. Or like if you slammed it, or if you like slam, I'm like trying to make them fall. And I finally get so violent with the cupboard in my illustration that one of them does fall, and I try and catch it, and I don't, and it smashes. And then she's like, oh, okay, I see how it is. And I was like, see, this is what's going to happen. She's like, this is what's going to happen if a crazy person comes in our house and shakes our cupboard. And then at that point, we have more problems than these mugs, And I was like, you need to shut your mug, okay? Because this is about to escalate. You're not going to be able to stuff this back in the box, okay? And it's just, we're going at each other. And it finally gets to the place where we're yelling back and forth about this thing. And I get so worked up and frustrated that I'm just like, fine, I'll just never do the dishes again. And I ran in the other room because, I was very mature. We got married at I would think I was 20 years old when we got married. And so it's like, just very young and didn't really. And so we didn't talk about it for a few days. Then we go out to eat with some friends. Then they're like, are you guys okay? And we're like, well, we just been having a fight, just like marriage stuff. And they're like, what kind of stuff? And then we got to start going into it. And it seems, and then once you ever have a fight in front of another couple and then they're looking at you like, you people are crazy, okay? And at first, I thought it's so annoying. Now that we're the older couple and younger couples have fights, we're like, isn't that cute? We're in a good space right now. They're crazy, right? You said it to them in the car on the way home, not there. But it got out of hand, right? And I wonder if you have had these moments, whether it's in your core love relationship with your spouse, with your partner, maybe it's with your kids, maybe it's with a coworker, a boss, where you realize that you don't really see things the way they see things. Like they don't, the way they want to do something isn't the way you want to do something, and you kind of realize that you see things differently. But in that moment, it doesn't feel like they're different as much as it just feels like they're wrong, right? And in those moments, I think what happens is, in the confines of our own heart, we find ourselves thinking the world would be such a much better place if people would just see things and understand things and do things the right way, AKA my way, okay? And so many of us have these thoughts, whether it's in person, whether it's when you're scrolling through Facebook, you're like, I tell you what's wrong with the world. Man, people need to know what I know and do what I do, I mean, I don't do all of it, but I know I should, and that's what's important, is that I understand, right? And the reality of it is, our way makes sense to us, right? That's why it's our way. And here's what we don't realize. We're like, why are they being dumb? Why are they doing it the wrong way? But here's what you may not realize. Their way makes sense to them. That's why it's their way. Now, this may sound crazy to you, but everything everyone does makes complete sense to them. To you, you're like, that's what crazy looks like, right? But to them, they're just like, this is normal. This is the way, this is logic, this is how it's done, right? And what can end up happening in these moments is we're coming to a disagreement with I have my way, and I like it, I believe in it, that's why it's my way. And they're approaching it from the same point of view. And what we don't often understand is that, just because my way is my way doesn't mean that it's the only way. And when we become entrenched that my way of seeing things, that my way of understanding things, that my way of doing things is the only possible way, man, we are set up for failure in our relationships. When we become entrenched that we are the only ones who could ever be right, that our experience is the only one that matters or counts. And you're in a bad place if your goal is to connect. But it's hard, isn't it? It's hard not to impose our way on other people. Like, you ever find yourself just accidentally doing it? You're just like, oh, bless your heart, let me just help you, right? You don't even realize that you're trying to impose, but you just naturally want to just show them how to do it. But then at the same time, isn't it so difficult not to get indignant when someone is trying to impose their way on you? Right? It's like, why did they get so triggered when I was just trying to help them be a decent human? And also, why are they telling me what to do? That is uncalled for and inappropriate, right? And we don't realize that it's the same. It's two different sides of the same exact coin. And I think this is the foundation of most fights, right? Why can't you do it my way? Or, why are you trying to get me to do it your way? That's what we argue about in life. And why do we do this? Because we all want to win. And, if we have totally different perspectives and you win, then I feel like I'm losing. And if there's one thing that we crave winning, but more than that, we hate losing. It'd be better not even to play than to lose. Like, that's the American spirit, right? Like, we'd rather withdraw than try and lose, right? Like, we just hate that thought. And, but the result ends up being that when, we become convinced that only one of us can win, we both lose. Because what happens is our aim becomes showing our way is better instead of searching for common ground upon which we can connect with one another. And I will tell you, you think you want to win, but what you really want is to connect. You have become convinced that you want to win, but you really, really want to connect. That is what your that's your deepest desire, is that you want to feel connected to life, to people, to your Creator, to your community. It's how you're made to be. And in fact, that is the pathway to fulfillment. The Apostle Paul, who wrote most of the New Testament, he talks about, all of us collaborating and being connected to something that's bigger than us. Like, he talks about this as being kind of the meaning of life. And he uses this illustration of life is best when you understand other people as part of, like, the same body. We would call it a community. He says this is the goal of Christianity. This is the goal of life, that we would love one another and that we would work together to make ourselves and the world better. The catch is we're human, and beyond that, we're American. And so we're like, that's nice, but I'd rather win. I want to win. And then we push for the win, and then somehow it feels hollow. It feels empty. I got what I wanted, but I don't feel like I wanted to feel. You see, comparison and competition between you and me will kill our intimacy. And intimacy is what you're after. Comparison between you and me and competition between you and me will kill our intimacy. This is the death blow to relationships. When we stop prioritizing intimacy and start elevating competition between us and comparison between the two of us, and we start trying to win instead of trying to connect. So how does love handle this? Because differences create this natural sense that, like, oh man, they're different, and and we have differences of opinion, but like I need to win, and so and then that creates a bunch of problems. Like, how does love handle that? If the goal is intimacy, how does love deny some of these natural tendencies and push towards intimacy? And beyond that, our culture piles on top, right? And so some of these natural tendencies we have are even worse because culture's like, oh, no, winning is more important. Winning is more important. And then we feel hollow. So how does love handle differences? We're going to continue looking at Paul's commentary on love. He writes this elaborate, probably the most famous definition of love in the entire world. It's in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, and it's often read at weddings. I did a wedding yesterday. It was read at the wedding, okay? You probably heard at a wedding. And although that's great and appropriate, Paul is not trying to write wedding poetry. He's trying to write practical advice to real people living in the real world, struggling with real differences, and not knowing why kind of just trying to win isn't really working for them. And we started talking about this definition last week. And Paul gives us two things that love is. He says love is patient and love is kind. If you missed that, definitely catch up by listening to the audio or watching the video. You can do that through our website or through iTunes or Spotify or Vimeo, whatever is most convenient for you. But then he turns a corner and he starts telling us some things that love is not. And that's what we're going to pick up this week. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 4, the second half of verse 4, the first part of verse 5, he says, love is not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. Love is not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. Now, when you look at those words, you're like, yeah, okay, yeah, I can understand that. But what do these things actually mean? And in the world in which they were written, like when Paul is thinking of these concepts, like what does he mean by these words? And I want to break them down for you today. The first word he uses is jealous. Like love is not jealous. And so what is jealousy, right? Jealousy, as it's written, it's actually this passage is written in Greek. And the original word that this is translated from, the Greek word, is a word that means to fill with anger because someone else has what I want. To fill, isn't that what it feels like? It feels like you're filling up with this frustration, right? Because someone else has what I want. Sometimes you didn't even know you wanted it until you saw they had it. Anybody else have that problem? You didn't even know that was like, yeah, I didn't even know it was a vacation you could go on. And then I saw that they went, and now what? How come you didn't take me? That's not fair. I don't like that. Why aren't they? You know what? My whole life is horrible, okay? Like, why? That was a nice beach, okay? Like the one we went to is like just up the street. Not even it doesn't even count because we didn't have to get on a plane to go to it, so, right? It's like I didn't even care about that promotion until Karen got it, and then it just feels like, that's ridiculous. Sometimes I think, our jealousy surprises us. You ever have a moment where you're like, why am I so upset with them right now? Why is everything they do annoying to me, right? And, I think a lot of times, if we're reflective, we realize that it's jealousy that's driving it. And oftentimes, it's not actually the thing they've acquired that you want. It's the status or notoriety or acceptance or freedom that it affords them. That's why you didn't know that you wanted it until you saw that they had it, because you don't really want that thing. You want what you think they're getting out of it. And you're like, whew. Man, but maybe if I did that, if I had that, then I would be treated this way. I would feel this way. I would be elevated in other people's eyes in this way. And I hate that I'm not. Sometimes the thing that we're jealous of is, again, this takes a lot of soul-searching to be honest with yourself to realize. Sometimes it's just that they like themselves and their life more than we do. Sometimes the thing that we're jealous of is that they seem to have a sense of purpose and meaning that I don't have. And I don't like that. I don't necessarily want your job, but I hate that it gives you something that mine doesn't give me. I don't like that. It makes me frustrated with you. I don't want to be with your partner, but you have a connection that I don't feel like I have, and I don't like that. And that makes me feel jealous of you. I don't want what you have, but I want what I think you're getting out of it. The literal definition of this is red-hot frustration. I love that. That's what it feels like. And you've been in this place, where the more you think about what they have, the more you build a case inside of your head of why they don't deserve it, right? It's like you can't even help yourself. You're like, they don't work as hard as me, okay? And they have a totally unfair advantage, okay? And I could get those kind of results too if I was willing to do that, which I'm not because it's beneath me, okay? Also, if they're succeeding in a way that I'm not, it's only because they're cheating, okay? Or at the very least, it's all luck and no skill because I'm way more skilled than they are and I haven't had that kind of success in my life. And the more you think about it, the harder it is not to obsess over it. And before you know it, whenever you see or think about them, you get all worked up. And now, everything they do is annoying to you. Even innocuous things that other people are like, that's not really that big a deal. It just sets you on fire. It fills you with this red-hot frustration, right? And everybody else is like, ooh. And just, you think they can't tell, people around you, oh, they can tell, right? When you just snap one day, you're like, ha, you guys see how Denise is using mayonnaise? It's ridiculous. Be a normal person, Denise. And they're like, okay, that's weird. Something is coming. I don't think this is about mayonnaise. This is getting awkward. And what often happens is jealousy mutates. Jealousy mutates and escalates into pride. And pride is our way of protecting ourselves from jealousy. It's often our way of hiding ourselves from jealousy. It's a way of hiding jealousy from others, but even of hiding our jealousy from ourselves. Like sometimes we have convinced ourselves with our pride that we aren't jealous. In fact, the jealousy is driving the pride. The Greek word that's translated as pride is this word that means to become overly inflated or puffed up. And, this is when we tell ourselves, like, you know what, I don't even want what they have. I might have used to, but I don't even care because what I have is way better than their dumb thing, okay? That's pride. Pride is the act of shrinking them to make ourselves feel or seem bigger, better, more valuable, more significant, or more important. And what pride ultimately ends up doing is pride demeans, demotes, or dismisses anything that doesn't allow me to see myself as superior. Like any quality, any point they make, any ability, any parameter, yeah, they're good at that, but that's a dumb thing to be good at. Like, nobody even cares, right? Demean it, demote it, dismiss it. Yeah, they made a point, but it's based on, like, idiocy. So, I mean, like, have you even checked their references? Those people are quacks, okay? So, like, not important, right? Yeah, they have this skill, but who wants to be good at that thing? It's not meaningful in the real world. And we just squash it. And this is what pride does. Pride reinterprets the rules mid-game in whatever way will help me win. Because that's what I think I want. I want to win at all costs. And, man, kids do this all the time. You ever seen kids playing a game and one kid who really wants to win starts to lose and they're like, whatever, I don't even care. I wasn't even trying in the first place because this is a stupid game. And besides, I'm good at other stuff that I'm not even going to invite you to because you wouldn't understand because I'm too good for it. You know what? And little kids, you're looking and you're like, oh my gosh, you're so jealous that they're winning, that you've inflated yourself. Like your pride is such a simple smokescreen for your jealousy, and I can see right through it. But as we get older, we get better at hiding it. We get better at hiding the fact that our pride is really just a smokescreen for our jealousy, to where it's kind of harder to see in others seeing it us and even us seeing it in ourselves, but that's still what's driving it. That's still where it's coming from. And over time, pride makes this subtle shift from, I don't like what you did, to, I don't like who you are. And there's a word for this. It's contempt. And it's a heart posture that says, I'm better than you, and you are lesser than me. And that's what happens when jealousy goes unchecked, when anger goes unaddressed, when pride is given free range, when insecurity runs rampant. It mutates into contempt. And as you can imagine, it is absolutely toxic in relationships, especially marriage. In fact, the research shows that contempt gone unchecked almost always ends in divorce because relationships cannot survive a partner with a view that says, I'm better and you're lesser. I don't just not like something you did. I don't even like who you are. Love can't survive that. I think it's interesting that, the Greek definition here of pride is being puffed up. The fascinating thing about that is when something's puffed up, it's inflated, which means it's just full of air. It's hollow. It's like a beach ball, right? It's like this thin piece of plastic, this small truth small skill, small value, ability, or achievement that gets stretched out and blown into something bigger than it really is. And this is what pride does. Pride works overtime in a person's life to convince themselves and others that they're more substantial or significant than they really are. And once you begin to believe your own hype, it bleeds out. And eventually you become unable to conceal your contempt. And that's what boasting and rudeness actually are. And this is part of the reason why, there's a pattern in this speech that he's using where he pairs two words together and another two words together. And what he's doing is he's telling us, there's these first two things that I just talked about that are really attitudes. They're internal things. And the second two, they're actions. Boasting and rudeness are external evidences of the internal existence of jealousy and pride. The two cause the other. And so when he's pairing these two things together, he's saying it's not this, which creates that, so it's not that either. And it's not this, which actually creates that, and it's not those things. It's none of those things. The Greek word that we get boasting from is this word that means to brag in comparison to. To brag in comparison to. It's like the announcement of your own achievements and accomplishments. It's like displaying your own highlight reel. It's a look at me moment, right? Again, little kids do this all the time. Look at me! Look at me! And it's the crazy part is we all have that sense. We get intuitively that that's what boasting is. And when we see it in the adult form, even though it comes on last year we netted about whatever, blah, blah, blah. And you're not even asking them about that. And what you see is, look at me! Look at me! Right? We tend to see right through it. And the point isn't just to draw attention to where you're winning, it's to draw attention to where you're winning in comparison to where you feel like others are losing. The point of doing it is to point out where you're a little bit above or ahead of others. It's a way of trying to feel better about yourself. Whenever you see or hear someone boasting, what they're really doing is trying to cover up their insecurity. They're trying to appear big enough that no one suspects that inside they feel small. Then there's this word that's translated as rude or rudeness, and it means to blatantly treat someone as beneath you. You see, boasting is about propping myself up. Rudeness is about taking them down. That's the differentiation here. And rudeness is ultimately contempt come to life. It's disrespect, sneering, sarcastic mockery, mimicry, condescension, name-calling, eye-rolling, hostile humor. It's this outward display of disgust and superiority. And it's defeating. It's shaming. It's enormously emotionally abusive. It's a way of making someone else wither and withdraw or back off or back down by sending signals to them that you think that they are less than. And experts on mental health now tell us that this, more than any other form of abuse, is the greatest cause of anxiety and depression in our society. Rudeness in its true form. Love isn't any of those things. And by the way, to explain what love is not is to explain who God is not. Because God is love. And I just want to tell you, if you, over the course of your life, have been handed an image of God that looks like these words, then you haven't been handed an accurate image of God. You've been given something, you've been given a portrait that is incorrect. And sometimes we reject God, but what we're rejecting is not really God. We're rejecting a bad explanation of God. And when Paul is trying to tell us in this passage that love isn't jealous or prideful or boastful or rude, he's trying to tell us that God is not jealous or prideful or boastful or rude. That's not who he is. And Paul says that these four are the opposite of love. And what he's ultimately telling us if you were to distill it down into one statement, is ultimately that love is not insecure. Love is not insecure. And so if you're receiving or feeling or experiencing insecurity, that's not coming from a place of love. It's coming from a place of fear. And Scripture tells us that there is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear. Love is not insecure. If someone is manipulating you through their insecurity, they're not showing you love. That's not what it is. Because that's where these four things stem from. Jealousy is really just insecurity. Pride is just insecurity. Boastfulness is insecurity. Rudeness is insecurity. It's insecurity run wild. In fact, love is the inverse of all these things. Love is celebratory, humble, and affirming. This is what love is. If you are to intuit what Paul is saying, he's saying it's not these things, it's their inverse. It's celebratory, humble, and affirming. So what do these things mean? Celebratory, to be celebratory, is choosing to be genuinely happy about the good things happening to others. This is what it is to celebrate them. Choosing inside, in your own heart and mind, to be genuinely happy about the good things that happen to others. That's so hard to do when you kind of don't like them, right? Or when you a lot don't like them, right? It's hard to do, but that's what it is to celebrate. It's also hard to do it when you like them, but like, what about me? How come I didn't? I'm working hard. Like, it's hard, but again, that's shifting out of love into an insecure place. And love says, like, you know what? This isn't about me. This is about you and what's going on in your life. And I want to celebrate the good things that God is pouring into people's lives. Like, man, if you're experiencing something good, that's a good thing. And this is not about me comparing myself to you. We're not in competition. Like, I want to celebrate that with you. Love is humble, and humility is seeing other perspectives as valuable, insightful, and helpful for your growth. Again, pride is the opposite of humility, right? Pride walks around and is like, you know what, guys, thanks for showing up. I have all the answers. I know all of the things. I know the right way to do everything. Really only my experiences and opinions matter here. So are we all square? Man, people love working with me, right? Like that's pride. But humility is like, you know what? I don't have it all figured out. I haven't experienced everything that you've experienced. You know some things that I don't know. You see some things that I don't see. I am so trapped in my own story and experience that like there are so many different perspectives that I can't even begin to grasp unless I stop, slow down, shift into a humble mode, and begin to try and seek out and learn and understand where you're coming from. Humility believes that everyone has something to teach them, even those who are younger than them, even those who have less experience than them, even those with whom they disagree. And love is affirming, and an affirmation is highlighting to others what you appreciate and admire about them. Again, celebration and humility are things that actually are heart conditions. Affirmation is something that brings those things to life. Like when you are really celebrating people internally and when you are humble, there's a response that comes out, and that response is affirmation, which is highlighting to other people what you appreciate and admire about them. And some of us are just like, you know what? I do celebrate people, and I don't think I have all the right answers. I mean, no one would know that by my actions because I keep all that stuff to myself. Outwardly, I'm mean to people, but listen, I know I sarcastically demean that person, but they know I think they're awesome and their perspective matters. No, they don't. Because people don't know what's in your heart. They know how you're treating them. They're reading your actions to discern your motivations, where those things are coming from. They can only see what you do. They can't see into what you feel. And this is great in theory, but how do you do this? I want to give you a quick example as we close from the life of Jesus of how he lived this out. When Jesus comes on the scene and begins to start his teaching ministry, there's actually another prophet who happens to be his cousin. His name is John the Baptist. And Jesus is very different from John the Baptist. And both of these men, they really have the same heart and goal for humanity. They both want to help people know and love and understand and experience God. But they were so different. I mean, John the Baptist was fiery and aggressive, but Jesus was kind of calm and poetic. Jesus used a lot of stories and metaphors, but John the Baptist was more eccentric. He was loud. He was very like, tell it like it is. Jesus lived in the city. John lived in the wilderness. And man, it would have been really human for either of these people to have looked at the strengths of the other and become extraordinarily jealous, prideful, right? And then for that stuff to bleed out into the way they treated one another. But you don't really see that in their story. It's not full of pride or boasting. It's not full of rudeness. What you see is a picture of two people who are working together and affirming and celebrating one another and experiencing true community and connectedness. And this is really rare. I mean, when you read, even throughout the Old Testament, there are prophets. You don't often see like prophets just like hanging out, you know? They're all very like eccentric and kind of egotistical, right? Like they're not like, we should partner up and be like there are prophets in the Old Testament who hardly ever cross paths because it's just like there's not room for both of us in the same room, okay? But it was odd. You have these two prophets, John and Jesus, who are very different, and yet they managed to keep insecurity from ruining the relationship. In John chapter 1, I'm just going to give you an overview, verse 35, Jesus comes on the scene, and John already has a few disciples. In fact, he doesn't have that many. He just has a handful at this point. And he has his disciples, and then Jesus comes on the scene, and they start to get to know him. And after hearing Jesus teach one time, John's disciples are like, wow, that guy is amazing. Do you mind if we just follow him now? I mean, I feel like if I were John, I would have been like, oh, I see how it is. I thought we were like day one. Like I thought you guys had my back. I thought you guys were for me, and you're just going to betray me like that. But he's like, you know what? He is amazing, and I'm glad that you resonate. You know what? If being around him turns you into looking and understanding and connecting to God, man, go where he's going. Follow him, man. I don't want to discourage you from that. In John chapter 3, verse 26, John's disciples come to him, and they tell him, they start complaining. They're like, hey, do you know what? If you do a head count in the different locations, Jesus has more followers now than you, which is not cool because you started like way before him, okay? You're the original. You're the number one, okay? You started it, and like he's now doing this whole thing, and like that's not okay. And like you want us to like say something, and he's like, we're not in competition with one. I'm not comparing myself to him. I'm doing another thing, and in fact, like we complement one another. In fact, if we're working towards the same goal, like it's not about me versus him or who has more or who's doing more. It's about like what are we doing together? What goal, what end are we trying to get to? And he squelches the sense of competition that was beginning to exist between the two of them. And there's this moment in Matthew chapter 3 where Jesus is ready to be baptized, and so he goes to John, who other people are trying to stir stuff up between, and he goes to John and just says, hey, I want you to baptize me. And John's like, I don't know if I can, like, I shouldn't even, I can't do that. You should be baptizing me. And Jesus is like, no. Like, there are things that even I have to learn from you. There are things that I can receive from you. I want to affirm your leadership and your giftedness and the things that you're doing. And Jesus allows himself to be baptized by his cousin, this other teacher, this other prophet who's so different from him. Then there's this moment in Matthew chapter 11 where people are trying to speak to the greatness of Jesus. And we tend to do this as humans, right? Like, in order to make one thing great, we have to compare it to something else that's not as great. And yet Jesus, when given this comparison between him and John, he takes the opportunity to talk about how great John is, how much he admires and respects him, how much love he has for him. He affirms and celebrates him. And what the relationship between Jesus and John make evident to us is that really the best way to combat insecurity is to do this, is to be content with who you are and to celebrate who they are. And that requires some work on your part. But love is willing to do it. Love does the inner work necessary to be content with who you are while celebrating who they are. And if you are not content with yourself and who God has made you to be, and you cannot celebrate who God has made them to be, you have some inner work to do. And love is willing to do it. Love submits itself to the process of the hard work required to learn to love yourself and to learn to affirm them. To learn to be content with who I am and how I look and the situation in my life and the money that we make in our family and the vacation that we went on and the husband that I have and the situation that we're in and the way we've chosen to raise, like a contentment and appreciation for that, while still being able to say, and they do it different and they have other stuff. And I will never have those abs. But you know what? That is great for you. That is so great for you. I'm going with a different sort of a look, okay? You're going for that classic sculpted. I'm going for more like the Pillsbury Doughboy sort of a vibe. But you know what? My lady is into that, okay? So you know what? I can celebrate you and be content with me. I can do both things at the same time because I've done the work that love requires. To hold both of these things up at the same exact time. And I'll tell you, if you want to uproot insecurity, which will always rear its head in the forms of jealousy and pride and boasting and rudeness, if you need to get that stuff out of your relationships so that you can thrive and stop just surviving in your core connections, you're going to have to lean into love and do your work. You're going to have to submit to the fact that the reality of it is that there's not just one way to be, one way to see things. There's not just one set of experiences, that in fact we are a body, a community. And the more you can lean in to celebrating, affirming them, and learning from them, the more you will experience intimacy, connection, and fulfillment. And I know you think you want to win, but you really want to connect. Isn't it time to stop chasing after something that doesn't make you feel like you want to feel? Isn't it time for something better? Like, what did you, if you decide you're going to stop comparing and competing with the people that you do life with? Like, what if, like, when you felt that twinge of jealousy, you immediately chose to be happy for what's happening to them and to put that into words? What if when you felt that pride welling up, you decided to see other perspectives as valuable and insightful and helpful for your growth? Like, what if when you noticed that you were kind of boasting or bragging a little bit, you switched gears and you began to highlight to others what you appreciate and admire about them? And here's the thing, when you're trying to get used to this stuff, you're going to catch yourself doing the wrong thing and need to stop and begin doing the right thing. You're going to catch yourself in the vein of doing the unhealthy thing. And you're going to need to switch gears. And sometimes this looks like just calling yourself out in the moment of like, I had a moment like this last week where I had to tell my friend that I was like, you know what? I am putting somebody else down so I can feel better about myself, and that is not who I want to be. You know what actually is awesome about them? This, and this. And I'm sorry, they're not even in the room, but like, I'm sorry that I said that even to you, because it means it exists in here, and I don't want to be that guy. That's not who I am. Willing to submit yourself to that process and begin to change gears, value something else. That's doing your work. And let me tell you, it's worth it. Nobody who experiences the depth of connectedness and intimacy ever feels like, not really worth it. In fact, it's what we're all desperate for. But there's a price. That price is work. But that work is worth it. And that's what I want to pray into your life today, that you would cling to the supernatural power of God to lean into love in your story. Would you bow your heads with me across this room? Father, I am grateful and thankful for who you are and what you have done in each of our lives. God, I'm thankful for the love that you give us. You don't ask us to do something, to put something out into the world and into our relationships that you have not already modeled for us. And God, I'm grateful that when we get a definition of love, we're really getting a definition of you. And God, I pray that you would help us to look like you, to react like you, to do things the way you do things. God, I pray that you would be our model. And God, you would help empower us to do what we cannot do on our own. That you would help us to be content with who we are while celebrating who they are. And God, that we would experience what it is we're really